This is no longer a rumor whispered behind palace gates. It is a structural shift, unfolding in real time, with consequences far beyond California real estate. According to sources with direct visibility into cross-Atlantic royal briefings, confirmation emerged within the last 48 hours that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have formally stepped away from their Montecito residence as the Riven Rock estate is quietly prepared for sale. What the public believed was a lifestyle decision, insiders now frame as an institutional rupture, one that intersects with royal finance, constitutional optics, and long-standing agreements negotiated after the Sussex departure. Behind closed doors at Windsor Castle, this development is reportedly being read not as retreat, but as repositioning, and that interpretation is triggering alarms, legal, symbolic, and political, inside the monarchy itself. What happens next may determine far more than where the Sussexes live. The confirmation did not arrive with a press release, nor with a smiling photograph staged for American media. Instead, it surfaced through paperwork, logistical withdrawals, and a sudden silence around a property once described as a permanent refuge. According to sources familiar with the matter, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are no longer residing at their Montecito home, with the Riven Rock estate now formally positioned for sale. On its surface, the move appears procedural, another high-profile couple adjusting assets in an unpredictable market. But inside royal circles, this is reportedly being interpreted as a destabilizing signal, one that contradicts years of public insistence that California represented finality, safety, and independence from the crown. Senior aides at Buckingham Palace are said to have taken notice immediately, not because of sentiment, but because of precedent. The Sussexes' post-royal settlement negotiated after their 2020 departure was built on the assumption of geographic and operational distance. Montecito was not just a home, it was the anchor point of a new, carefully defined status. Now, with that anchor lifted, questions are reportedly circulating through internal channels. Where does this leave security obligations? What does it imply about long-term financial planning? And most critically, does this reopen constitutional ambiguity the palace believed had been resolved? Sources say King Charles III was briefed on the development while at Sandringham House, where advisors allegedly framed the sale not as a lifestyle change, but as a potential recalibration of leverage. If the Sussexes are liquidating their most visible symbol of independence, some within the institution are asking whether pressure, financial or strategic, is being applied from elsewhere. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, aides close to Prince William are reportedly assessing how this move could reverberate through public trust and future monarchy planning. Because once symbols start shifting, institutions prepare for aftershocks, and as those aftershocks begin to register, the palace's attention is now turning toward the mechanisms it still controls, mechanisms that could redefine the balance of power altogether. What began as a property adjustment is now reportedly being examined through an entirely different lens, one shaped by constitutional law, royal prerogative, and instruments that rarely leave archival silence. According to sources briefed on internal discussions, senior advisors are revisiting legal frameworks that were considered dormant but never dismantled after the Sussex departure. At the center of those discussions is the Privy Council, a body whose authority extends far beyond ceremony. While no formal action has been announced, insiders say briefing papers have begun circulating that outline the Crown's residual powers over titles, security designation, and institutional recognition. These are not punitive measures, sources stress, but protective mechanisms designed to preserve clarity in moments of ambiguity. The Montecito exit, viewed internally, has reportedly triggered that ambiguity. Advisors are said to be examining how the letters patent of 1917, originally drafted to restrict royal titles during wartime, might still inform modern interpretations of status, entitlement, and public representation. While any application today would be unprecedented, sources emphasize that precedent is not absence. It is simply unused authority waiting for justification. One senior constitutional analyst allegedly warned that the sale of the Riven Rock estate complicates earlier agreements that assumed a fixed overseas base. Those agreements, while informal in public perception, were reportedly underpinned by expectations tied to security logistics, funding arrangements, and diplomatic optics. Remove the base, and the architecture begins to wobble. At Windsor Castle, aides are said to be preparing contingency scenarios, not decisions, but pathways. These include recalibrating how the Sussexes are referenced in official documents, how engagements involving Commonwealth interests are framed, and how institutional distance is maintained without provoking escalation. Crucially, sources claim King Charles III has been advised that inaction may itself carry risk. If the palace appears passive while symbolic markers dissolve, it could invite challenges to authority from multiple directions: media, politics, and even within the family hierarchy. Yet no move is simple. Any activation of legal or institutional tools risks confirming the very conflict the monarchy seeks to neutralize. The balance is delicate, and the margin for error is thin, because as these mechanisms are quietly reconsidered, attention is now turning to why the Sussexes may have accelerated this shift, and what exactly forced their hand. And that question leads directly to allegations the palace did not expect to confront so soon. As legal frameworks are quietly dusted off in London, a parallel examination is reportedly unfolding behind the scenes, one focused not on authority, but on conduct. According to sources with access to cross-border financial briefings, internal concern has shifted toward a series of undisclosed arrangements that may have accelerated the Montecito exit far more abruptly than publicly acknowledged. At the center of these concerns are alleged financial restructurings tied to the Riven Rock estate itself. While no wrongdoing has been formally established, insiders claim the property was quietly leveraged in recent months in ways that were never communicated to palace intermediaries who, until now, believed the home to be financially stable and strategically static. This, sources say, raised immediate red flags. More troubling, according to those briefed, are claims that third-party advisors, operating outside traditional royal oversight, may have facilitated agreements that indirectly implicated the Sussexes' titles, branding rights, or future public-facing projects. None of these claims have been substantiated in court, but within the palace, the mere suggestion of entanglement with external commercial interests has reportedly triggered alarm. Senior aides are said to be asking whether the Sussexes' post-royal activities, when combined with a sudden liquidation of their primary asset, could expose the institution to reputational or constitutional strain. The monarchy, sources emphasize, operates as a closed system. When one component becomes financially or symbolically porous, pressure travels quickly. There is also reportedly concern over timing. The decision to list the Riven Rock estate allegedly coincided with renewed negotiations involving media contracts and speaking arrangements, talks that, if finalized, could reposition Prince Harry and Meghan Markle in a way that blurs the line between private citizens and quasi-official figures. That blur, insiders warn, is precisely what earlier agreements sought to prevent. At Buckingham Palace, a confidential briefing allegedly outlined the risk of perceived betrayal, not of family sentiment, but of institutional trust. The monarchy, unlike a corporation, cannot simply terminate a relationship without consequences. Every move is read as precedent. And now, sources say, a countdown has begun. Because if these alleged arrangements are not clarified within a narrow window, the palace may be forced to act, not in anger, but in defense. That window, insiders warn, is closing fast. Inside the palace, the language has reportedly shifted from assessment to urgency. What was once framed as an evolving situation is now being described in internal correspondence as time-sensitive. According to sources familiar with the latest briefings, senior royal advisors have identified a narrowing window in which clarification must be delivered before institutional momentum overtakes discretion. At issue is not merely the sale of the Riven Rock estate, but the sequence surrounding it. Insiders claim the palace has quietly sought assurances regarding the Sussexes' future base of operations, particularly as it relates to security protocols, diplomatic exposure, and the continued use of royal identifiers in international contexts. These requests, sources say, are not demands but expectations, ones tied to the stability of the Crown's external posture. The urgency is reportedly compounded by calendar pressure. With upcoming Commonwealth-related engagements, state-level meetings, and strategic briefings already scheduled, advisors warn that unresolved ambiguity could bleed into arenas far removed from Montecito. The monarchy, they argue, cannot afford mixed signals when its representatives, active or otherwise, are under global scrutiny. Sources allege that a soft deadline has been set, not announced publicly, but circulated internally. A date by which clarity must be achieved, either through private reassurances or through visible actions that restore definitional boundaries. Failure to meet that timeline, insiders suggest, could force the palace into moves it would prefer to avoid. At the same time, pressure is reportedly building on the Sussexes themselves. The logistics of relocation, the complexity of asset liquidation, and the management of international obligations have, according to those close to the situation, created a convergence point where delay becomes costly. Every week without resolution amplifies speculation, and speculation in royal contexts hardens into narrative. Within the family, the situation is said to be even more fraught. Sources describe private conversations marked by restraint rather than warmth, with intermediaries carrying messages that are precise, formal, and carefully worded. This is not a personal appeal, it is an institutional reminder, because once deadlines are acknowledged, even silently, they reshape behavior. And as that pressure mounts, the focus is reportedly shifting inward, toward questions of inheritance, legacy, and the irreversible weight of choice. What began as a real estate listing is now a reckoning over what exactly is being left behind. As the external pressure intensifies, sources say the conflict has begun folding inward, away from contracts and councils toward questions the monarchy has historically found hardest to confront. Not law, not optics, but legacy. According to insiders with knowledge of private family discussions, the Montecito exit has reopened anxieties long believed settled, particularly around inheritance, symbolic continuity, and the meaning of royal belonging once geography dissolves. Within Windsor Castle, advisors are reportedly revisiting the concept of the crown as a custodial institution rather than a personal inheritance. That distinction matters now more than ever. Prince Harry, though no longer a working royal, remains bound by blood, by history, and by documents that do not expire with distance. And those documents, sources say, are being quietly re-examined in light of the Sussexes' apparent repositioning. At the heart of this dilemma lies a deeper question: what is owed and what is forfeited? The monarchy operates through vaults, both literal and symbolic. Trusts, artifacts, discretionary arrangements, and historical endowments that pass not through wills alone but through expectation. According to insiders, senior figures are concerned that continued ambiguity could complicate future transitions, particularly as Prince William prepares for responsibilities that extend beyond reign into restructuring. Family advisors are said to be weighing whether unresolved status creates risk not just for the present king, but for the next. Legacy in this context is not sentimental, it is operational. It governs who is consulted, who is briefed, and who is insulated when crises arise. The fear, sources allege, is that drifting definitions may force future monarchs to adjudicate conflicts that should have been closed definitively now. There is also, reportedly, a moral dimension being debated behind closed doors. Some within the family view the Sussexes' independence as earned, even necessary. Others argue that continued reliance on royal symbolism, while stepping further from its obligations, creates an imbalance that history does not look kindly upon. These are not accusations, they are fault lines. And as those fault lines deepen, attention is turning toward whether strategic countermoves are required, not to punish, but to preserve. Because legacy, once compromised, cannot be quietly repaired. What comes next, insiders say, will determine whether this moment becomes a footnote or a fracture. With legacy concerns now openly acknowledged inside the institution, sources say the palace has shifted into a phase of deliberate, measured action, not confrontation, not reconciliation, but strategy. According to those briefed on recent internal planning sessions, senior aides are mapping countermoves designed to stabilize authority while minimizing public escalation. One such move, insiders allege, is silence, intentional, prolonged, and coordinated. The absence of comment regarding the Montecito exit is not accidental. It is reportedly part of a broader effort to deprive speculation of confirmation while buying time to align internal consensus. In royal operations, silence is rarely passive, it is often preparatory. At the same time, advisors are said to be refining communication protocols that subtly recalibrate how Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are positioned in official contexts. This includes adjustments to briefing language, seating hierarchies at potential future events, and the framing of any indirect references. None of these shifts are dramatic on their own, but collectively they signal boundary reinforcement. Behind the scenes, sources claim Prince William has taken a more active role in these discussions, not as an enforcer, but as a steward of continuity. His focus, insiders say, is on insulating the institution from volatility, ensuring that future transitions are not complicated by unresolved ambiguity from the past. That perspective, reportedly shared by key advisors, favors clarity over compromise. There are also indications that financial levers are being reviewed. While no decisions have been announced, internal assessments are allegedly examining the sustainability of ongoing security arrangements and support structures previously extended as transitional measures. These assessments are framed as routine, but their timing has not gone unnoticed. Crucially, all of these counter-moves are said to be coordinated to avoid provocation. The objective, sources emphasize, is not to force a reaction, but to create an environment where choices become unavoidable. Pressure, applied indirectly, often proves more effective than direct challenge. And as these strategies take shape, attention is now turning to the practical vulnerabilities they expose. Because strategic clarity often carries a price, and that price, insiders warn, may soon be felt in very tangible terms. As strategic adjustments quietly solidify in London, the consequences are reportedly beginning to surface in more concrete arenas. According to sources familiar with the Sussexes' financial posture, the decision to list the Riven Rock estate is not occurring in isolation, but against a backdrop of mounting resource strain that has narrowed margins once assumed secure. High-value properties, insiders note, are not merely assets. They are cost centers. The Montecito residents reportedly carried ongoing expenses tied to private security, staffing, insurance, and maintenance, costs that intensified as public attention fluctuated. With institutional support structures being reassessed, those expenses, sources say, have become increasingly difficult to justify without long-term certainty. There is also reportedly pressure from contractual obligations that demand liquidity and flexibility. Media ventures, philanthropic initiatives, and advisory agreements often require upfront investment before returns materialize. Insiders suggest that maintaining a static, high-profile estate while navigating variable income streams may have constrained options more than previously acknowledged. Within the palace, these developments are being read as confirmation of earlier concerns. When symbolic holdings begin to feel like liabilities, advisors argue, it signals a mismatch between posture and capacity. That mismatch, they warn, can accelerate decision-making in unpredictable ways. Security costs are said to be a particularly sensitive point. Without a fixed residence, protection becomes more complex and expensive, requiring mobile arrangements that strain resources and invite scrutiny. Sources allege that discussions around who bears responsibility for those costs are now unavoidable, especially as earlier transitional assumptions fade. Financial pressure, however, is not only numerical, it is psychological. According to those close to the situation, the convergence of public speculation, contractual deadlines, and institutional recalibration has created a sense of compression, where every option feels constrained by competing risks. And in that environment, isolation grows. Allies become cautious, advisors hedge. The safety net, once provided by clarity, begins to fray. As these pressures mount, insiders say the true impact is shifting from balance sheets to mindset. Because when resources tighten and symbols lose their shielding power, the siege becomes internal, and the margin for error collapses. By this stage, sources say the conflict has moved beyond strategy and into endurance. The external pressures, legal ambiguity, financial strain, and institutional recalibration, are now reportedly manifesting as psychological siege. Not dramatic outbursts, but sustained tension that erodes certainty over time. According to individuals familiar with the Sussexes' inner circle, the sale of the Riven Rock estate has coincided with a period of heightened isolation. Without a fixed base, routines fracture. Decision-making becomes reactive rather than deliberate. Every choice is weighed against how it will be interpreted, not just by media, but by institutions with long memories and longer reach. Insiders describe an environment where trust is increasingly transactional. Advisors are consulted, but with caution. Alliances are reassessed. Even silence from London, once interpreted as distance, now reportedly feels like pressure, an absence that invites imagination to fill the gaps. In royal dynamics, what is not said often carries more weight than what is announced. There is also, sources allege, a growing awareness that public sympathy has limits. Narratives that once resonated may now compete with fatigue, skepticism, and shifting priorities. This awareness, insiders say, intensifies the sense of vulnerability. When the spotlight no longer guarantees protection, exposure feels sharper. Psychological strain is not confined to the personal. It affects negotiation posture, risk tolerance, and the willingness to compromise. According to those briefed, the convergence of deadlines and uncertainty has narrowed the Sussexes' strategic horizon, forcing decisions that prioritize immediacy over long-term positioning. Within the palace, this stage is reportedly recognized as critical. Institutions understand that prolonged ambiguity weakens resolve. The question is not whether pressure exists, but how long it can be sustained before choices are made under duress. And as this siege deepens, the narrative approaches its most consequential moment. Because when endurance is tested, judgment follows. What remains now is not strategy or resource, but moral reckoning. As the storm of speculation, strategy, and psychological strain converges, insiders emphasize that the ultimate reckoning will be measured not by property listings or press statements, but by moral and institutional judgment. The monarchy, by design, exists as a custodian of history, tradition, and continuity. Its authority depends on perception as much as protocol, and sources say that every action taken or avoided during this Montecito transition will be scrutinized against those standards. King Charles III and his advisors are reportedly weighing the balance between familial loyalty and institutional necessity. The sale of the Riven Rock estate, while framed publicly as a practical decision, has created an inflection point where precedent, perception, and power intersect. Sources suggest that behind palace walls, aides are reviewing not only titles and privileges, but the broader ethical calculus. How does one preserve stability, honor agreements, and maintain trust when a branch of the family operates partially outside institutional oversight? For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, insiders claim the moral stakes are equally high. Independence carries cost, and the palace is reportedly preparing signals, formal and informal, that remind all parties of the boundaries established in previous settlements. According to those briefed, the objective is not retribution but clarification, a clear statement that while history remembers generosity, it also records responsibility. The implications extend far beyond the Sussexes themselves. Analysts say these events may redefine how future generations of royals navigate autonomy, accountability, and visibility. Every decision sets precedent for security provisions, financial arrangements, and symbolic authority. Observers note that an institution that fails to enforce its own frameworks risks eroding the very cohesion that allows it to function across centuries. Ultimately, sources emphasize that the unfolding scenario is not concluded. The Riven Rock estate is more than a property. It is a symbol of a fragile balance between independence and obligation. How the Sussexes, the king, and the senior advisors respond will shape the monarchy's narrative for years to come. For the public, the takeaway is both dramatic and instructive. The monarchy operates as a living system of accountability, tradition, and consequence. Every shift, financial, geographical, or symbolic, carries ripple effects far beyond immediate perception. And for viewers tracking this unprecedented period in royal history, the story is ongoing, the stakes are profound, and every decision matters. As these events continue to unfold, the question remains: Who will define the next chapter and at what cost? Stay vigilant, because in the world of monarchy, silence often speaks louder than words.